The hum of the central heating filled the silence of the house. Outside, the last glow of twilight faded behind the rows of houses on our street, casting long shadows across the living room floor. My parents had left an hour ago, heading to a restaurant for some business dinner. It wasn't unusual for them to be away, and normally I didn't mind the quiet. But tonight the stillness seemed different, more charged, more intense. I was sitting on the couch, the soft glow of the TV casting flickering shadows across the walls. A random movie played, but I wasn't paying attention. My thoughts drifted, restless and aimless. Then I heard footsteps from upstairs. The familiar creak of the floorboards signaled him before he appeared at the base of a staircase. My brother Ethan. Well, technically my adopted brother. He walked into the living room, barefoot, with that casual, effortless way he always carried himself. His dark hair was slightly messy, like he'd just run his hands through it, and he wore a plain gray t-shirt that clung to his frame in all the right ways. I shook the thought out of my head immediately, hating myself for even noticing. "Parents gone?" he asked, his voice low and familiar as he flopped down on the couch next to me. I nodded, pulling my knees up to my chest. "Yeah, they won't be back until late." He stretched his legs out on the coffee table, his arm brushing lightly against mine as he settled in. I swallowed hard, forcing my gaze back to the TV. "What are we watching?" he asked, leaning back and letting his head rest against the cushion. His proximity was distracting, the warmth of him radiating like a low hum just beneath my skin. I cleared my throat. "I don't know. Just some random movie." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he shifted slightly, his arm now resting along the back of the couch, so close, I could feel the faint brush of his fingers against my shoulder. It wasn't intentional, I told myself. It couldn't be. But my body betrayed me. My pulse quickened, and my breath felt just a little too shallow. I hated how aware I was of him, of the way his presence seemed to fill the entire room. We sat like that for a while, the silence between us stretching longer than it should have. The air felt heavy, like the weight of something unspoken was pressing down on both of us. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Do you ever miss living somewhere else?" I blurted, my voice cutting through the quiet. "Before you came here, I mean." Ethan turned his head, his dark eyes meeting mine. There was something unreadable in his gaze, something that made my stomach twist in a way I couldn't explain. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but it's different here. Not bad different, just different." I nodded, looking away, before he could see the effect his words had on me. "Yeah, I get that." He shifted again, this time leaning closer. His arm brushed mine, and this time I knew it wasn't an accident. My breath hitched, and I prayed he didn't notice. But of course he did. He always noticed everything. "You okay?" His voice was softer now, like he was afraid of breaking the moment. I forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow even to my own ears. "Yeah, why wouldn't I be?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, his gaze lingered on me, searching for something I wasn't sure I wanted him to find. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You seem different tonight." I felt the weight of his words settle over me, suffocating and intoxicating all at once. I could feel the heat radiating from him, the warmth of his arm against mine, and the space between us that seemed to shrink with every passing second. I should have moved. I should have gotten up, created some distance, done anything to break the tension that was quickly spiraling out of control. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed rooted to the spot, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. "Ethan." I said his name softly, like a warning or maybe a plea. He leaned in closer, his breath warm against my ear. "I know," he whispered. "I know we're supposed to be just brother and sister, but—" "Don't," I interrupted, my voice trembling. "Don't say it." He pulled back just enough to look at me, his eyes filled with something raw and vulnerable. "Why not?" he asked, his voice breaking slightly. We're not even related, and you know there's something here. You feel it too, don't you? I wanted to deny it. I wanted to laugh it off, to tell him he was imagining things. But the words caught in my throat, stuck behind the truth I couldn't bring myself to admit. Ethan, I whispered again, this time with less conviction. My gaze dropped to his lips, and I hated myself for it. I hated the way my heart betrayed me, the way my body leaned into his without permission. He moved closer, his hand brushing gently against mine, and for a moment, the world outside that living room ceased to exist. It was just us, tangled in a mess of emotions we weren't supposed to have. I shouldn't be feeling this, I said, more to myself than to him. Neither should I, he replied, his voice soft but certain. But that doesn't change the fact that I do. I closed my eyes, my breath shaky. What happens if we cross this line? He was silent for a moment, and when he finally spoke, his words were filled with both fear and hope. I don't know, but maybe we don't have to figure it all out tonight. For a moment, I let myself imagine what it would be like to give in, to stop fighting the pull that had been drawing us together for months. But reality came crashing down around me, heavy and suffocating. I pulled away, my heart aching with the effort it took. We can't, Ethan. Not tonight, he nodded, though the pain in his eyes was impossible to miss. I know, he said quietly, but someday. I didn't answer. Instead, I stood up, my legs shaky, and walked toward the stairs. Good night, Ethan. Good night, he replied, his voice barely audible. As I climbed the stairs, the weight of the night pressed down on me. I knew we had crossed a line, maybe not physically but emotionally, and there was no going back. The question now was, how long could we keep pretending that nothing had changed? I turned the knob, and the warm spray of a shower hit my skin, cascading down my shoulders as the day's tension slowly began to dissolve. My mind was still spinning from the conversation with Ethan. The way he had looked at me, the things he had said, they lingered, echoing in the back of my mind, no matter how much I tried to push them away. The bathroom was dim, the soft glow of the night light casting shadows on the tiled walls. I tilted my head back, letting the water wash over my face, hoping it could wash away the confusion, the guilt, and the fluttering feeling in my chest that had refused to settle since the moment his hand brushed mine on the couch. Then, without warning, the lights flickered once and went out. I blinked, startled, as darkness enveloped me. The hum of the house faded, leaving behind only the sound of the water hitting the floor and my own breathing, suddenly too loud in the enclosed space. Great, I muttered, blindly reaching for the wall. My fingers fumbled against the cool tiles, but it was impossible to see anything. My pulse quickened, not from fear of the dark, but from the unsettling awareness of being trapped in it. My mind raced. Where had I left my phone? Probably on my nightstand. Not helpful. I called out instinctively, my voice echoing off the bathroom walls. Ethan. Nothing. I tried again, louder this time. Ethan. Are you there? A few seconds later, I heard the faint sound of footsteps approaching. Relief flooded me, but with it came that same nervous flutter in my chest. I pressed my back against the shower wall, clutching my arms around myself, as if the steam alone wasn't warm enough. Yeah, I'm here, his voice called through the door, muffled but reassuring. The power's out, I said, unnecessarily. I can't see anything. Hang on. I heard the click of a flashlight, and moments later, a faint beam of light seeped through the crack under the door. Do you want me to come in? I hesitated. My heart thudded against my ribcage, and I cursed the part of me that wanted to say yes without a second thought. Just shine the light through the door, I replied quickly. The light wavered for a moment before the bathroom door creaked open slightly. A sliver of brightness spilled across the floor, and then his hand appeared around the edge of the door, holding the flashlight so it pointed toward the shower. I exhaled, relieved to have some light, even if it wasn't much. "Thanks. Are you okay in there?" His voice sounded closer now, more concerned. "Yeah, just startled." I heard him shift outside the door, like he wasn't sure whether to stay or leave. My breath hitched as I imagined him standing there, waiting, while I stood in the shower with only a thin curtain separating us. The air felt heavier, thicker, with the kind of tension that wasn't just about the power outage. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked again, softer this time. I could feel his presence through the door. The warmth of it pressed against me, igniting that spark of something forbidden that I had been trying so hard to suppress. I leaned my head against the cool tile, closing my eyes. "Ethan," my voice came out quieter than I intended. "What is it?" he asked, and I heard him step closer. I pictured him just on the other side of the door, close enough to reach out and touch if the barrier wasn't there. I swallowed hard. What was I supposed to say? That I couldn't stop thinking about the way he looked at me on the couch? That I didn't know how to handle the way my heart reacted when he was near? "I'm fine," I whispered instead. "You can go back to the living room." The door creaked open just an inch more, enough for me to see his silhouette through the dim light. "I don't think you're fine," he said gently. "I know you, and something's been off all night." I felt the burn of tears behind my eyes and hated how vulnerable I was in that moment. Bare, exposed, and unable to hide the feelings I had spent months trying to bury. "Ethan, please." But instead of leaving, he stepped fully into the bathroom. The flashlight illuminated his face briefly before he set it on the counter, angling it toward the ceiling to give the room a faint glow. He closed the door behind him, leaving us in a soft, golden haze of light and shadows. My breath hitched. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the sound of the water. He didn't come any closer, but his gaze locked onto mine, intense and unwavering. "I'm not leaving you like this," he said firmly. "Not when you're clearly upset." I wiped at my face, not even sure if it was water or tears trailing down my cheeks. "This is crazy, Ethan." "I know," he admitted, his voice raw. "But that doesn't make it any less real." We stared at each other across the small space, the sound of the shower filling the silence between us. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. I knew this was dangerous, knew that if I let him any closer, there would be no turning back. But in that moment I didn't care. The weight of pretending, of denying what I felt, was suffocating. "I don't know how to stop this," I whispered. He took a step closer, just one, but it was enough to make my breath catch. "Maybe we don't have to stop it," he said softly. "Maybe we just have to figure out what it means." The steam swirled around us, blurring the edges of the room. He reached out, his hand resting against the edge of the shower curtain, close, but not touching me. His eyes searched mine, as if waiting for permission, for some kind of sign that I wanted this too. And I did, more than I wanted to admit. "Ethan," I whispered, my voice breaking. His fingers brushed against mine, light as a feather but enough to send a shiver down my spine. In that moment, it didn't matter that the lights were out or that we were standing on the edge of something we shouldn't be crossing. All that mattered was the way his touch made the world feel less heavy, less confusing. "I'm here," he said, his voice steady even though I could see the tension in his jaw. "I'm not going anywhere." I closed my eyes, letting his words wash over me like the water cascading down my back. And for the first time that night, I stopped fighting the pull between us. Ethan's fingers brushed mine, light as a whisper, and I froze, my heart racing as if it had been set alight. His gaze lingered, soft but searching, as though he were waiting for me to push him away or pull him closer. I didn't do either. My mind was too clouded, my thoughts tangled in the overwhelming confusion of the night. The dim light from the flashlight flickered gently, casting his face in shadow, and I could see it, his hesitation, his vulnerability, mirroring my own. My breath hitched, but I didn't pull back. His hand rested lightly against mine for a moment, and then, as if drawn by something neither of us could name, he leaned closer. My heart pounded louder with each passing second, echoing in my ears. I could feel the warmth of him, the way his breath mixed with mine, and for a brief moment, the world outside that small room didn't exist. The confusion, the guilt, the tension, they melted away like morning frost under the first touch of sunlight. When his lips brushed against mine, soft and uncertain, it felt like stepping off the edge of something I wasn't ready to name. The warmth of the kiss spread through me, gentle and hesitant, like we were both unsure of how far this would go, or should go. But reality didn't take long to snap back into place. The faint hum of tires on gravel reached my ears, and I gasped, pulling away just as quickly as the moment had begun. My back hit the cold tile of the wall, and I clutched the towel tighter around me as I struggled to steady my breathing. "They're back," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Our parents, they're back." Ethan blinked, as if waking from a dream. His gaze darted toward the door and his posture stiffened. "Already?" I nodded, listening to the unmistakable sounds of car doors closing and footsteps approaching the front porch. Panic bubbled in my chest. We had crossed a line, even if just barely, and there was no undoing what had happened. Ethan seemed to understand that too. He reached for the flashlight and took a step toward the door. "I'll go," he said softly, as though speaking any louder would make this moment real. I nodded, biting my lip to keep from saying something, anything, that might make him hesitate. My mind was spinning too fast to form coherent thoughts, but I knew one thing for certain. We couldn't let our parents find him here. He slipped out of the bathroom, closing the door quietly behind him. The faint glow of the flashlight disappeared, leaving me in the dim, misty aftermath of what felt like a dream I couldn't wake from. I pressed my palms against the cool tiles, trying to catch my breath. My reflection in the fogged mirror stared back at me, wide-eyed and flushed. After throwing on my clothes, I quickly ran a towel through my hair and stepped out of the bathroom, just as the lights flickered back on. The familiar hum of electricity filled the house, but it did nothing to settle the storm inside me. I could hear my mom's voice calling out cheerfully from downstairs. "We're home." I took a deep breath, forcing my heartbeat to slow. My fingers were still shaking as I made my way down the stairs, where I found Ethan sitting casually on the couch, scrolling through his phone as if nothing had happened. His expression was perfectly neutral, but when our eyes met for a split second, something passed between us, a silent acknowledgement of what we had just shared. "There you are," my mom said, smiling as she placed her purse on the counter. "Did the power just come back on?" "Yeah," I replied, forcing my voice to sound normal. "It wasn't out for long." "Well, I'm glad we didn't come home to a pitch-black house," my dad said with a chuckle, hanging up his coat. I busied myself with getting a glass of water from the kitchen, my back to the room, as I tried to calm the flurry of emotions still swirling inside me. I could hear the low hum of my parents chatting, their voices a backdrop to the chaos in my head. Then, just as I turned to head back upstairs, I felt a familiar warmth near me. Ethan stood close, his hand brushing lightly against mine for a fleeting moment before he pulled back. His eyes met mine, filled with that same unspoken weight as before. "We need to talk," he whispered, so softly that only I could hear. I nodded but kept my voice steady. "Not tonight." His lips pressed together, but he didn't argue. He understood. I needed time. Time to breathe, to think, to figure out what had just happened and what it meant for both of us. As I turned to leave the kitchen, I heard him sigh behind me, and it tugged at something deep inside my chest. This wasn't over. We both knew that. But for tonight it had to be.